The rain came down in heavy sheets, drumming against the pavement like a restless symphony. Streetlights flickered, casting uneven glows across the empty sidewalk. Somewhere in the distance, the low hum of the city carried on. Bars closing, cars splashing through puddles, lives moving forward without pause, but not for Daniel Carter. For him, the night was just another end to another long shift. Another day spent scrubbing floors, flipping mattresses, folding endless sheets, all to make ends meet for the one person who mattered most, his son, Owen. He was used to this routine, the exhaustion, the weight of responsibility, the quiet acceptance, that this was his life now. But then he saw her, a woman, soaking wet, shivering, standing alone beneath a dimly lit bus stop. She was out of place, too put together to be lost, too vulnerable to be safe, and when she looked up, her wide, striking blue eyes held a silent plea for help. Daniel should have kept walking. He had his own problems, his own battles to fight. But something about her made him stop. What he didn't know was that this woman wasn't just a lost tourist, and by the time the night was over, his life would never be the same again. What happens when a struggling single father helps a woman with no money, no phone, and nowhere to go, only to discover she's a billionaire CEO? Stay with us as we dive into a heartwarming, unexpected love story about fate, kindness, and the choices that change our lives forever. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story that will make you laugh, cry, and believe in the power of human connection. And now, let's begin. This is a struggling single dad saved a lost tourist girl, only to discover she owned the hotel he worked for. The night air was thick with humidity, a signature of Savannah's coastal embrace. The dim streetlights flickered, casting golden pools onto the wet pavement. Daniel Carter pulled his worn-out jacket tighter around his shoulders as he walked home from another exhausting shift at Riverview Inn. His muscles ached from hours of cleaning rooms, carrying heavy linens, and ensuring the guests' comfort. Comfort he himself could barely afford. He let out a deep breath, rubbing his temples. It was nearing midnight, and all he wanted was to collapse into bed. But he knew that wouldn't happen right away. His 7-year-old son, Owen, would likely be waiting for him, pretending to be asleep when Daniel peeked into his room. The thought made him smile despite his fatigue. Owen, his reason for everything. As he turned the last corner toward his modest home, something caught his eye, a figure standing alone near the bus stop. At first, he thought it was just another late-night commuter waiting for a ride, but as he stepped closer, the reality became clear. A young woman, soaking wet from the earlier rain, stood trembling. Her arms were wrapped around herself in a feeble attempt to ward off the cold. A single flickering streetlight illuminated her features, long auburn hair clinging to her face, delicate cheekbones, and wide, panicked blue eyes. She looked out of place, as if she had wandered into the wrong part of town entirely. Daniel hesitated. This isn't your problem, Carter. He should just keep walking. He had enough struggles of his own, bills to pay, a son to raise, a job that barely kept them afloat. But as he took another step, the woman shifted her weight unsteadily, almost stumbling. Damn it! With a resigned sigh, he walked toward her. Hey, he said, his voice low and cautious. You okay? She flinched, her eyes darting up to meet his. For a moment, there was pure uncertainty in her gaze, fear maybe, but then it softened, as if she recognized that he wasn't a threat. I don't know, she admitted. Her voice was softer than he expected, carrying a refined but exhausted tone. I lost my phone. My wallet too. I don't know where I am. Daniel frowned. Lost? Wallet gone? That didn't sound good. You, from around here? He asked. She shook her head, water droplets falling from her damp hair. No, I was Traveling. Just exploring. I must have taken a wrong turn. Something about the way she said it felt off. A wrong turn. People didn't just accidentally end up stranded at a nearly deserted bus stop in the middle of the night. You have someone you can call? Her lips parted as if to answer, but then she hesitated. No. Not right now. No phone. No money. No contacts. Daniel ran a hand down his face. This was a bad idea. He had no business getting involved. But the thought of leaving her here, alone in the middle of the night, sat wrong with him. Look, he started, I don't have much, but my place isn't far. If you need somewhere to warm up and figure things out. The words hung in the air between them. He braced himself for her to refuse, to back away in suspicion. But instead she exhaled sharply, as if she had been holding her breath, and nodded. Okay, she whispered. Thank you. Daniel led her through the quiet streets, his footsteps steady against the damp sidewalk. The closer they got to his home, the more he wondered if he was making a mistake, bringing a complete stranger into his house. What the hell was he thinking? But then he thought about Owen, his son, the one thing that mattered most. He wanted to believe that if Owen were ever lost, alone, scared, someone out there would help him too. His house was small but tidy. The living room was modest, with an old couch, a coffee table littered with Owen's toy cars, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of the grilled cheese sandwiches they had for dinner earlier. It wasn't much, but it was home. He turned to the woman, who still stood uncertainly by the door. You can sit, he offered. She hesitated before lowering herself onto the couch. Daniel grabbed a spare towel from the hallway closet and handed it to her. It's not fancy, but it'll help. Thank you, she murmured, taking it and wrapping it around herself. For the first time, he really looked at her. Even disheveled, there was something striking about her, the way her eyes flickered. With quiet intelligence, the way she carried herself with an air of dignity despite her current situation. You got a name? He asked, leaning against the counter. She hesitated again, just for a second. Isabel, she finally said. He nodded. Daniel. A small, almost grateful smile touched her lips. Nice to meet you, Daniel. At that moment, the sound of small footsteps padded down the hallway. Daniel sighed. Owen, the little boy, appeared in the doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes. His hair was a mess of brown curls, his dinosaur pajamas slightly too big for his small frame. Dad? Owen mumbled. Who's that? Isabel looked startled, but Daniel gave her a reassuring glance before crouching down to his son's level. This is Isabel. She got a little lost, so she's staying here for a bit. Owen's eyes shifted from his father to Isabel. Then, with the simplicity only a child could manage, he grinned. Hi, Isabel. Do you like dinosaurs? A startled laugh escaped Isabel's lips. She hadn't expected that. Yeah, she said, caught off guard. I think they're pretty. Cool! Owen's grin widened. Me too! I have a T-Rex toy. Want to see? Daniel shook his head, smiling. Owen, it's late, buddy. The boy pouted but nodded, his small shoulders slumping. Okay. Night, Isabel. Good night, Owen, she replied softly. As Owen shuffled back to his room, Daniel turned back to Isabel. You should get some rest too. We'll figure things out in the morning. She looked at him for a long moment before nodding. Thank you, Daniel, really. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't know who she really was. He didn't know why she was here. But somehow he had a feeling that this one night would change everything. Sunlight streamed through the small window, casting a golden glow over the modest living room. The faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mixing with the comforting scent of slightly burnt toast. Isabel stirred, her senses slowly pulling her from sleep. For a brief moment she forgot where she was. The couch beneath her was lumpy but warm, and the sound of soft humming reached her ears. Then everything rushed back. She sat up quickly, blinking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Last night, the rain, Daniel, Owen, Her fingers tightened around the edges of the blanket draped over her. He must have covered me up before going to bed. The thought sent a strange warmth through her chest, one she quickly pushed aside. Taking a deep breath, she stood, stretching out the stiffness in her limbs before cautiously making her way toward the sound of activity. The kitchen was small, but cozy, with cabinets that had seen better days, and a fridge covered in Owen's colorful crayon drawings. At the stove, Daniel stood in a wrinkled t-shirt, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. Owen sat at the small dining table, still in, his dinosaur pajamas, swinging his feet back and forth as he focused on coloring. The scene was so ordinary, so different from the polished, sterile mornings Isabel was used to. Hotel room service, perfectly arranged fruit platters, assistants waiting for instructions, and yet she found herself reluctant to interrupt it. Daniel must have sensed her presence because he turned, spatula still in hand. His gaze swept over her, assessing. "Morning," he said. "Sleep okay?" Isabel nodded, though the couch had been anything but comfortable. "Better than I expected." He smirked at that. "Coffee?" She hesitated. It was a simple question, but the act of accepting hospitality was unfamiliar territory for her. She wasn't supposed to need help from anyone, but here she was. "Yes," she finally answered. Daniel poured her a cup, sliding it across the counter. "No fancy creamers or sugar cubes, just regular old coffee." She took a tentative sip, the rich bitterness grounding her. "It's perfect." Owen looked up from his coloring and beamed. "Dad makes the best pancakes, too. Do you want some?" Isabel's lips curved slightly. "I'd love some." Daniel arched a brow. "You sure? They're just pancakes, not some five-star brunch platter." She rolled her eyes. "I think I can survive a meal without imported truffle shavings, thank you very much." Owen giggled, while Daniel simply gave her an amused look before flipping another pancake onto a plate. As they ate, Isabel couldn't help but observe the way Daniel interacted with his son. It wasn't just obligation, it was genuine love. He asked Owen about his dreams last night, listened intently to the enthusiastic rambling about dinosaurs, and even made silly T-Rex noises to make the boy laugh. Isabel had grown up surrounded by nannies, tutors, and strict expectations. Breakfast was never like this. "Do you always cook breakfast?" she asked, breaking the moment of comfortable silence. Daniel shrugged. "Owen's got to eat. Besides, I like cooking." There was something deeply admirable about that. A man who worked exhausting shifts but still made time to give his son moments of normalcy. "You're a good dad," she found herself saying. Daniel glanced at her as if trying to decide if she was being sincere. "I try." Owen suddenly looked up at Isabel, tilting his head. "What about you? Where's your family?" The question caught her off guard. "My parents—" She hesitated. "They're busy, always traveling, always working." Owen frowned. "They don't eat breakfast with you?" A strange tightness formed in her chest. "Not really." Owen seemed to process that for a moment before pushing his plate toward her. "You can have the last pancake, since you don't have breakfast people." Isabel's breath caught. Daniel let out a chuckle, shaking his head. "Owen, she's a guest. You don't need to bribe her with food." But Isabel took the offered pancake anyway, a small but genuine smile playing at her lips. The warmth of breakfast faded when she checked the clock. 8:45 a.m. Her stomach twisted. She had been off the grid for hours. No calls, no texts, no security team hovering over her. She needed to get back. Setting down her fork, she turned to Daniel. "I should probably try to find my hotel today. Do you think there's a phone I could use?" Daniel nodded. "There's a payphone a couple of blocks from here. I can walk you there after I drop Owen at school." School? Isabel blinked. Somehow the reality of Daniel's daily responsibilities hadn't fully settled in until now. "Yeah, I gotta get him there by 9. Daniel ruffled his son's hair. "Otherwise, the teacher says he starts T-Rex roaring at inappropriate times." Owen grinned proudly. Isabel laughed despite herself. That's an important skill, honestly, Daniel smirked. Glad someone appreciates it. 10 minutes later, she found herself walking alongside them, a billionaire heiress trailing after a single dad and his 7-year-old in a backpack covered in dinosaur stickers. It was surreal. At the school gate, Owen turned back and waved. "Bye, Isabel." She hesitated, then waved back. "Bye, Owen." Daniel led her toward the payphone, hands shoved in his pockets. "So, guess this is where you make your call." Isabel stared at the booth, fingers tightening at her sides. Once she called, this moment, this fleeting, strange, warm experience would be over. She would go back to boardrooms, meetings, luxury hotels, back to a life where no one shared pancakes, or made dinosaur sounds at breakfast, or covered her with a blanket without asking for anything in return. She swallowed hard and reached for the phone. Daniel leaned against the post, watching her carefully. "You got someone to pick you up?" She hesitated. Then for the first time in years, she lied. "Yeah," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll be fine." Daniel studied her but nodded. "Good. Take care, Isabel." Something inside her twisted painfully at those words. She wanted to say something, anything, to keep the moment alive. But he was already turning away. She watched him walk down the street, a man with nothing to offer but kindness. And yet somehow he had given her more than anyone else ever had. Isabel swallowed hard and lifted the receiver, but her fingers hovered over the buttons. She had a choice to make, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what she wanted. The luxury suite at the Sinclair Grand Hotel was breathtaking. Polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Savannah skyline, and handcrafted furniture imported from Italy. It was the kind of place most people only saw in magazines, but to Isabel Sinclair it felt cold. She sat on the plush leather couch, staring at the untouched room service breakfast on the glass table in front of her. A perfectly arranged fruit platter, steaming Belgian waffles, and freshly squeezed orange juice. Everything prepared exactly as she liked, and yet it tasted like nothing. She picked up her phone, scanning through the missed calls and texts that had flooded in since she had finally reached out last night. "Lucas, where the hell have you been? Assistant team. Your security detail has been searching for you for hours. Please confirm your location. Sinclair HQ. Board meeting rescheduled for Friday. Will you be in New York by then? Lucas, you better have a damn good excuse." She sighed, rubbing her temples. Lucas Montgomery, her father's right-hand man, a corporate shark who had been breathing down her neck since she was old enough to sign contracts. He was efficient, ruthless, and never missed an opportunity to remind her of her responsibilities. Isabel knew she should respond. She should be in damage control mode, ensuring that no rumors about her disappearance spread to the media or shareholders. But instead, her mind kept drifting back to a tiny, slightly messy kitchen, the smell of burnt toast, and a 7-year-old boy offering her the last pancake. She closed her eyes. It had only been a day, but something inside her had shifted. Later that afternoon, she found herself sitting at the grand mahogany desk in her suite, laptop open, emails piling up. But instead of answering them, she was reading something else. Daniel Carter's employee file. She had instructed one of her hotel managers to pull it for her under the excuse of conducting an internal review. Name: Daniel Carter. Position: housekeeping, staff employment duration: 3 years, performance notes: hard-working. Dependable, no complaints. It was so bare bones, so impersonal. A few typed lines to define a man who woke up before dawn to cook his son breakfast, who worked back-breaking shifts without complaint, who had taken in a stranger without expecting anything in return. She clicked through the financial records. His salary was embarrassingly low, especially considering the hours he worked. Even with overtime, it wasn't enough to provide stability. No wonder he looked exhausted. Her grip tightened on the mouse. This wasn't fair. Daniel Carter deserved better, and for the first time in her career, this wasn't about business. It was personal. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter was back in his world, a world where bills stacked up faster than paychecks. His shift at Riverview Inn had started at noon, and he was already behind schedule. The hotel was overbooked, the front desk was swamped, and the housekeeping team was understaffed as usual. Daniel moved with practiced efficiency, stripping linens, restocking toiletries, making sure every inch of the rooms met corporate cleanliness standards. His back ached, his hands were dry and cracked from endless scrubbing, but he pushed through. He always did. He was used to this life. He had accepted it, but for the first time in years, his mind wasn't just on surviving. It was on a woman with striking blue eyes, sitting in his kitchen, sipping coffee that wasn't nearly good enough for someone like her. It was absurd. She was gone. Back to whatever life she had before getting lost that night. He shouldn't be thinking about her, and yet he was. That evening, Isabel sat in the executive lounge of the Sinclair Grand, swirling a glass of wine she had no interest in drinking. Lucas Montgomery sat across from her, his suit crisp, his expression unreadable. "So," he said coolly, "you disappear without a word, and now you're suddenly interested in a minor hotel operation. Should I be worried?" Isabel ignored his thinly veiled irritation. "The Riverview Inn is underperforming." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "And this is suddenly your concern?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I want to evaluate the staff and operations personally." Lucas leaned back, scrutinizing her. Personally, she held his gaze, daring him to challenge her. She was still a Sinclair. She didn't need to explain herself. Finally, he exhaled, shaking his head. "Fine. Do what you want, but don't get distracted, Isabel. Your father expects you in New York by Friday. Playtime in Savannah is over." She didn't react, didn't let him see that his words irritated her. Because this wasn't playtime. This was the first time she had ever wanted to do something that actually mattered. 2 days later, Daniel was called into the hotel manager's office. He braced himself, mentally preparing for bad news. Cut hours, layoffs, another ridiculous and corporate policy. Instead, the manager, a middle-aged man who barely looked up from his desk, shuffled some papers and cleared his throat. "There's been an internal review of staffing efficiency," he said in a monotone voice. "Corporate has decided to offer you a promotion. You're being moved up to a management position, supervisor of housekeeping. Comes with a raise." Daniel blinked. "What? A promotion? Out of nowhere?" "Are you sure?" Daniel asked cautiously. "This wasn't even a position that existed before." The manager shrugged. "Corporate directives. They want to invest in long-term employees. You've been here 3 years. No complaints. Consider yourself lucky." Lucky. That word settled uneasily in Daniel's stomach. Nothing in his life had ever come easy, and suddenly, out of nowhere, he was just being handed a promotion. Something wasn't right, but he had a son to feed, rent to pay, a future to think about. He couldn't afford to question it. So he nodded. "All right, thank you." As he left the office, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, had pulled some strings for him, and deep down, he already knew exactly who it was. That evening, as Daniel locked up for the night, his mind was still spinning. That's when he saw her, standing in the hotel lobby in a sleek black dress, looking like she didn't belong in his world at all, except she had. For one night. Isabel Sinclair. She turned, met his gaze, and in that moment, he knew his life was about to change again. Daniel Carter had seen a lot of things in his years working at Riverview Inn: frustrated guests throwing tantrums, drunk businessmen stumbling into the wrong rooms, even the occasional celebrity trying to keep a low profile. But nothing had ever knocked the air out of his lungs the way seeing Isabel Sinclair standing in the hotel lobby did. She looked completely different from the woman he had met that night in the rain. Gone were the damp clothes and the vulnerable, lost expression. In their place was an image of effortless power, a sleek black dress, heels that probably cost more than his monthly rent, and an air of quiet authority that made the entire room shift around her presence. She didn't belong here, except apparently she did. Isabel met his gaze, something unreadable flickering in her blue eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the hotel lobby faded into the background, leaving only the weight of unspoken words between them. Finally, Daniel found his voice. "What are you doing here?" She tilted her head, amusement dancing at the corners of her lips. "You work here, I own it. Seems like we both have a reason to be here, don't we?" His stomach tightened. He'd been right. She had pulled strings for him. Daniel exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening at his sides. "So that's it? You disappear, then suddenly I get a promotion out of nowhere, and now you're just here." Her expression didn't waver. "I didn't disappear. I left. And I didn't give you anything, Daniel. You earned that promotion." He let out a humorless chuckle. "Right, because upper management at a struggling hotel just happens to take an interest in housekeeping staff at random." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't back down. "I read your file. You've been here for 3 years, never missed a shift, never once called in sick. Do you know how rare that is? This place should have recognized you a long time ago. If my presence here made them finally notice, then good." Daniel studied her, searching for any trace of insincerity. He wanted to believe she was just some out-of-touch rich girl trying to soothe her conscience, but there was something in her gaze, something genuine, that made it hard to dismiss her. Before he could say anything else, the hotel manager approached, looking flustered. "Miss Sinclair, I apologize for the delay. We've prepared the executive suite for your stay, and I've arranged a full staff briefing tomorrow to discuss any operational concerns." Daniel blinked. "You're staying here?" Isabel turned back to him, her expression composed. No, for how long?" A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Long enough to make a few changes." By the next morning, the entire hotel was buzzing with rumors about the mysterious billionaire owner suddenly taking an interest in their tiny establishment. The staff, especially the management, were terrified. Corporate oversight usually meant one thing: restructuring, and restructuring meant layoffs. Daniel, however, wasn't concerned about the gossip. He was concerned about Isabel. She was everywhere. Inspecting the kitchens, reviewing front desk procedures, sitting through meetings with department heads, actually listening when employees talked about the problems they faced. Most CEOs delegated. Isabel immersed herself. Daniel found himself watching her more than he should. He told himself it was because he still didn't trust her motives. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. She was brilliant. Watching her work was like watching an artist at a canvas, sharp, decisive, but with just enough restraint to let others feel like they had a voice. But she was also out of place. In a way she didn't seem to realize. She didn't know how to carry a laundry cart without knocking into things. She didn't know that the vending machine in the break room had been broken for months because corporate refused to approve a repair. And she definitely didn't know how to sweep without somehow looking like she was holding an ancient artifact for the first time. Daniel found that last one out firsthand. "You're doing it wrong," he said, arms crossed, watching as she awkwardly maneuvered a broom across the marble floor. Isabel shot him a glare. "Sweeping is sweeping. How can you do it wrong?" "Like that." "Helpful," she muttered, adjusting her grip. He sighed, stepping forward. "Here." She stiffened as he moved behind her, reaching over to adjust her hands on the broom handle. He was too close, close enough that he could smell her perfume, subtle, elegant, completely out of place in a dusty hallway. Isabel didn't say anything. Neither did he. For a moment, the air between them shifted, something unseen crackling just beneath the surface. Then she cleared her throat and stepped away. Got it, thanks. Daniel shoved his hands into his pockets, suddenly needing distance. Any time, boss. Her lips twitched. You don't have to call me that. Sure thing, boss. She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Later that evening, Daniel was finishing up paperwork in the staff lounge when Owen burst through the door. Dad! Dad! Guess what? Daniel barely looked up. You figured out time travel, and now we can go back to a point where rent was cheaper? Owen huffed. No, but Isabel invited us to dinner. Daniel's head snapped up. She what? She said she wants to take us out, like fancy dinner. Owen's eyes sparkled with excitement. I've never had a fancy dinner before. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Kid, I don't think... Come on, Dad, Owen pleaded. Please, Isabel's really nice, and she said they have chocolate cake. Daniel sighed, running a hand over his face. He should say no. He should remind Owen that they didn't belong in Isabel Sinclair's world, but the look in his son's eyes, pure excitement, pure joy, made it impossible to refuse. And so, against his better judgment, he found himself agreeing to have dinner with the woman who had already disrupted his world more than she realized. That night, when they arrived at the restaurant, Daniel expected to feel out of place, and he did. The crisp white tablecloths, the hushed conversations, the polished silverware. This wasn't his world. But then he looked at Owen, eyes wide with wonder, happily swinging his feet as he tried to figure out which fork to use first. And then at Isabel, who, despite her wealth and status, looked genuinely happy just to be sharing a meal with them. For the first time, Daniel let himself wonder. Maybe their worlds weren't as incompatible as he thought. But just as the thought. Settled, Isabel's phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at it, and for the briefest moment her expression darkened. Daniel saw it, and he knew. Whatever this was, whatever fragile thing they were building, wasn't going to last. The soft glow of candlelight flickered against the polished silverware, casting delicate shadows over the pristine white tablecloth. The hum of quiet conversation filled the air, punctuated by the occasional clink of fine china. The restaurant was nothing like the places Daniel usually ate at, and yet here he was, seated at a table with Isabel Sinclair and his wide-eyed son, Owen, who looked as if he had just walked into a fairy tale. The boy beamed as he examined the menu, his small fingers tracing over the elegant script. Dad, look, they have steak, like real steak. Daniel chuckled. Yeah, buddy, it's a fancy place. Across the table, Isabel smiled, watching their exchange. Order whatever you'd like, Owen. Tonight's on me. Daniel's shoulders tensed. He didn't like the idea of someone picking up his tab, especially not a billionaire who probably spent more on a handbag than he did on rent. But Owen was too excited for him to argue. As the waiter took their orders, Daniel found himself stealing glances at Isabel. She looked at ease, but there was something in her eyes, something distant. He had seen it before. In people who had too much responsibility, too many expectations pressing down on them. And then there was her phone. Even though she had silenced it, she kept checking it, her fingers subtly tightening around the device. Each time the screen lit up, something was wrong. Daniel didn't know what, but he knew when someone was carrying a weight they weren't ready to share. He also knew better than to push. Despite the underlying tension, dinner was surprisingly nice. Owen, oblivious to the tension between the adults, dominated the conversation, telling Isabel all about his dinosaur collection, how he planned to be either a scientist or a superhero, and how his dad made the best grilled cheese sandwiches in the world. Isabel listened, truly listened, laughing in all the right places, engaging with him in a way that felt so natural, so genuine, that Daniel had to remind himself who she was. She wasn't just the woman who had spent a few nights in his home. She was Isabel Sinclair, heiress to a billion-dollar empire. And yet, watching her laugh at Owen's stories, watching her sip her wine with an almost wistful expression, she didn't seem like someone untouchable. She seemed Real. Okay, Owen said, setting his fork down dramatically. Now we get dessert, right? Daniel shook his head. You're pushing your luck, kid. But Isabel said there was cake, Owen protested. Isabel smirked. I didn't. Daniel sighed, defeated. Fine, one piece. Owen grinned victoriously and Isabel laughed. It was a sound Daniel hadn't heard often, but he liked it. Too much. Just as the waiter set the chocolate cake in front of them, Isabel's phone lit up again. This time, she didn't ignore it. Excusing herself, she stepped away from the table, pressing the phone to her ear as she walked toward the restaurants. Entrance! Daniel watched her go, his stomach tightening. He should have just let it go. Should have focused on Owen's delight as he dug into the cake. But something about the way she left bothered him. She wasn't just taking a casual call. She was escaping. And that meant whatever was on the other end of that phone was something she didn't want him to hear. A few minutes passed before Daniel made up his mind. Stay here, bud, he said to Owen. I'll be right back. Owen barely acknowledged him, too busy savoring the dessert. Daniel stood and made his way toward the entrance, stepping just close enough to hear Isabel's voice. Low, sharp, edged with something he hadn't heard before. Frustration. You don't need to keep calling me Lucas. Daniel froze. Lucas, the name sounded familiar. We'll discuss it when I get back, Isabel continued, her voice clipped. I told you I needed a few days. That hasn't changed. A pause. Then, a sigh of irritation. No, I don't think I need to be reminded of my responsibilities. And I don't care what my father thinks. She stopped abruptly, as if catching herself, lowered her voice. Just drop it for now. I'll handle it. Daniel quickly turned away before she could notice him listening. By the time she returned to the table, she had smoothed out every trace of irritation, slipping back into that polished, controlled version of herself. But Daniel had seen the crack in the facade, and now he had questions. Back at the table, Isabel picked up her wine glass and took a slow sip as if nothing had happened. Sorry about that, she said smoothly. Business call. Daniel studied her for a moment before nodding. Figured. She glanced at him as if assessing whether he believed her. But Daniel didn't press. Not yet. Owen, of course, was oblivious to the tension that had settled between them again. He licked chocolate off his fork and declared, "Best cake ever." Isabel smiled, but this time it didn't quite reach her eyes. Daniel noticed. When dinner was over, Isabel insisted on paying, and this time Daniel didn't argue. His pride wasn't worth ruining the night for Owen. As they stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around them. Owen let out a happy sigh, stretching his arms. "Can we do this again?" Isabel hesitated, then smiled. "I'd like that." Daniel exhaled. He should say no, should remind himself that their lives weren't meant to overlap like this. But before he could speak, Isabel turned to him. "Let me drive you two home," she offered. Daniel shook his head. "We'll walk. It's not far." She looked like she wanted to argue, but then she nodded. Owen gave her a hug, a small, innocent gesture that made something flicker across Isabel's face, something Daniel couldn't quite name. As they walked away, Daniel fought the urge to turn back, to look at her one more time, because, despite everything, despite the worlds that separated them, he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't ready to let go of whatever this was, and neither was he. The next morning, Daniel Carter was back at Riverview Inn, navigating the all-too-familiar rhythm of cleaning rooms, changing sheets, and making sure the place ran as smoothly as possible, despite its outdated facilities. But today, something was different. The moment he walked into the staff lounge, all eyes turned to him. A few of his co-workers whispered amongst themselves, sending quick glances his way. Some of them looked impressed. Others, wary. Daniel frowned. What the hell was going on? "Looks like you've moved up in the world," a voice muttered beside him. He turned to see Marcus, one of the senior housekeeping staff, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. Daniel gave him a questioning look. "What are you talking about?" Marcus scoffed. "Don't play dumb, man. Word is out, you got promoted, management." Daniel blinked. "Promoted? What?" he asked, his stomach twisting with unease. Marcus shrugged. "Came straight from corporate. Apparently they think you deserve a supervisor position. Guess it pays to have powerful friends, huh?" Daniel's jaw tightened. Isabel. His thoughts immediately flashed back to last night, to the way she had looked at him across the table, to the business call she had taken. So that's why she had shown up at the hotel. She hadn't come to see the place. She had come to interfere. Barely an hour later, Daniel found himself standing inside the manager's office, listening as his boss droned on about his new responsibilities. "Of course, the role comes with a pay raise," the manager added, flipping through a file as if this wasn't a big deal. "You'll be overseeing a team, handling scheduling, and ensuring guest satisfaction at a higher level. It's a great opportunity." Daniel was barely listening. His fists clenched at his sides. He didn't believe in miracles. He had worked hard his entire life, scraping by, pushing through, doing his best to give Owen a future, and in all that time no one had ever just handed him anything until now. "Why? Me?" Daniel asked, his voice sharp. The manager finally looked up, surprised by the question. "Excuse me? Why me?" Daniel repeated. "People don't just get promoted out of nowhere. So tell me, who put in the recommendation?" The manager hesitated. Then he sighed as if already bored of this conversation. "If you must know, corporate oversight has been reviewing staff records. Ms. Sinclair took an interest in you." There it was. Daniel let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Isabel. She had done this. Had she thought she was helping him? That he needed a charity promotion from a billionaire who didn't know the first thing about struggling to survive? His blood boiled. He didn't need her pity. The manager studied him carefully. "Look, Carter, if you don't want the job, I can give it to someone else." Daniel cut him off immediately. "I'll take it." The manager smirked. "I thought so." But Daniel wasn't taking it because of Isabel Sinclair. He was taking it because of Owen, because pride didn't put food on the table. By the time his shift ended, Daniel knew he had to face Isabel, and sure enough, he found her exactly where he expected, sitting in the hotel's executive lounge, reviewing paperwork, a half-finished cup of coffee beside her. She looked up. When he walked in, and just like before, there was something too calm, too composed about the way she greeted him. Daniel. He didn't return the pleasantries. Instead, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, fixing her with a hard stare. "So," he said flatly, "you want to tell me why you decided to play God with my life?" A flicker of something passed through her eyes, annoyance, regret, but she didn't look away. "I didn't play God," she replied smoothly. "I recognized talent that wasn't being appreciated. That's what good leadership does," Daniel scoffed. "Right, and it has nothing to do with the fact that you spent a few nights at my place." Her jaw tensed, just slightly. "I would have made the same decision regardless." Bullshit. The word landed between them like a gunshot. For the first time, Isabel visibly stiffened. Daniel leaned forward, his voice lower now, but no less intense. "You think I don't see what's happening here? You felt guilty. You thought giving me a raise would fix that." She didn't deny it, and that silence told him everything. His chest tightened. "I don't need your help, Isabel." Her eyes darkened. "Everyone needs help, Daniel. Even you." "Not like this." A long pause. Then, finally, Isabel sighed, setting down her pen. "I wasn't trying to insult you." "Well, congratulations," he said, standing. "You did anyway." He turned to leave, but before he could take another step, her voice stopped him. "I saw your paycheck." His feet froze. Slowly, he turned back. "What?" Isabel exhaled, her gaze unwavering. I saw how little you're being paid for the work you do, and I couldn't stand by and pretend that was okay. You think I did this out of pity? I didn't. I did it because you deserved better, and if you can't see that, then maybe you should be mad at the system that undervalued you in the first place, not at me for trying to fix it. Daniel's jaw clenched. Because damn it, she wasn't wrong, but that didn't make it easier to swallow. You don't just walk into someone's life and start fixing things, he muttered. She met his gaze head on. Why not? Because it makes it harder to go back to how things were. Because it makes me wonder what it would be like to have someone on my side for once. Because it makes me feel things I shouldn't. He didn't say any of that. Instead, he shook his head and left, feeling more conflicted than ever. That night, as Daniel tucked Owen into bed, his son looked up at him sleepily. Are you still mad at Isabel? Daniel sighed. I don't know, kid. Owen yawned. She's nice, and she likes pancakes. Daniel let out a small chuckle despite himself. Yeah, she does. Owen's voice softened. Then maybe she's not trying to hurt you. Maybe she just wants to help. Daniel swallowed hard, because for all his frustration, for all his pride and stubbornness, he knew Owen was probably right, and that was the scariest part of all. Daniel Carter had spent most of his life figuring things out on his own. He had learned to navigate the struggles of being a single father. He had learned how to stretch a paycheck to cover rent, food, and Owen's ever-growing list of school supplies. He had learned how to survive without asking for help, but ever since Isabel Sinclair had stepped into his world, that balance had been shaken, and now he had to figure out what to do about it. Daniel avoided Isabel for the next 2 days. It wasn't hard. She was busy with meetings, staff evaluations, and business calls that stretched late into the evening. But even without seeing her, he could feel her presence in every change happening at Riverview Inn. The vending machine in the break room was fixed. The front desk staff received upgraded training programs. Kitchen workers were given actual meal breaks instead of eating leftovers in storage closets. And Daniel, well, he had an office now. It was small, barely more than a glorified supply closet, but it had a desk, a functional chair, and, most shockingly, a nameplate on the door. Daniel, Carter housekeeping supervisor. Seeing his name like that, etched in metal, felt foreign, like he was stepping into someone else's life. He should have been grateful. Instead, all he could think about was how none of this would have happened without Isabel, and he didn't know how to feel about that. By the 3rd day, Isabel found him first. He was walking through the back corridors of the hotel, clipboard in hand, when her voice stopped him. Daniel. His grip on the clipboard tightened, but he didn't turn around. Not now, Isabel, he muttered, already heading toward the linen storage. She followed. Yes, now. Daniel exhaled sharply, then finally faced her. She looked different, tired. Not in the way people looked after a long day, but in the way someone looked when they were carrying too much. Why are you avoiding me? She asked. I'm not. She arched a brow. Really? Because it sure feels like you are. Daniel clenched his jaw. He didn't want to have this conversation, but Isabel wasn't backing down. Is this about the promotion? She pressed. Daniel let out a humorless chuckle. You mean the one you orchestrated? Her expression didn't change. I already told you. I didn't give you that job out of pity. I gave it to you because you deserved it. Yeah? And what happens when you leave, Isabel? What happens when corporate decides I'm not worth keeping around anymore? She hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Daniel took a step back, shaking his head. That's what I thought. She let out a frustrated sigh. Daniel, I'm not leaving tomorrow. I'm trying to fix things here. And if that means making sure the people who actually care about this place get the positions they deserve, then yes, I'll do that. But you won't be here forever, he shot back. People like you, your world, it moves on. And people like me, we're left picking up the pieces. For the first time, something flashed in her eyes, something raw, unguarded. And what if I don't want to move on? She asked softly. Daniel froze. The air between them shifted, heavy with words unsaid. Isabel wasn't just talking about the hotel anymore, and Daniel didn't know what to do with that. That night, as Daniel was locking up, he found Isabel sitting on the rooftop terrace, staring out at the Savannah skyline. He knew he shouldn't go to her, but he did anyway. She didn't look at him when he approached. "I used to love this city," she murmured. Daniel sat down beside her, leaving enough space between them to breathe. "Used to," she exhaled. "Before my life became boardrooms and contracts and profit margins. Before I realized that my name wasn't mine. It belonged to my father's empire." Daniel studied her profile, the way the city lights reflected in her eyes. "I read about your family," he admitted. "Sinclair International. That's a big deal." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, it is. And it's exhausting." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Why are you here, Isabel?" "Really?" She finally turned to face him. "Because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be just me, not a CEO, not the Sinclair heiress, just Isabel." Daniel held her gaze. He understood that more than he wanted to admit, because he wasn't just Daniel Carter, the hotel employee. He was a father, a man trying to build a life that didn't feel like it was slipping through his fingers. And now, somehow, she was a part of that life. The next morning, Daniel arrived at work to find a familiar figure waiting in the lobby, a man in a sharp navy suit, hair neatly combed back, expression cool and unreadable. Daniel didn't recognize him, but he knew exactly who he was. Lucas Montgomery, Isabel's father's right-hand man, and if he was here, that meant trouble. Lucas turned, spotting Daniel immediately. A slow, calculating smile crossed his face. "So," he said smoothly, "you're the man who's been distracting Isabel." Daniel clenched his jaw. This wasn't going to end well, and for the first time he realized whatever this was between him and Isabel, it wasn't just something they could ignore anymore, because now the real world was coming for them. Daniel Carter had never liked men in suits. Men in suits meant bank notices, landlords, corporate executives who didn't know the first thing about the people whose lives they controlled. And now, standing in the middle of the Riverview Inns, a lobby was the embodiment of everything Daniel despised about that world. Lucas Montgomery. The man looked exactly as Daniel expected, polished, calculated, and utterly unimpressed by his surroundings. "So," Lucas said, stepping forward, his gaze sweeping over Daniel like he was an inconvenience rather than a person. "You're the man who's been keeping Isabel entertained." Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't take the bait. "She's not here," he said flatly. "Try again later." Lucas smiled, but it was the kind of smile that belonged to a man who knew he always got what he wanted. "I'm not here to see Isabel. I'm here for you." Daniel crossed his arms. "Yeah? And why's that?" Lucas sighed, as if this conversation was beneath him. "Because it's time for you to understand exactly what you're dealing with." Daniel didn't flinch. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with." Lucas smirked. "No, you don't." Lucas gestured toward the hotel lounge. "Let's talk." Daniel didn't want to. But something in Lucas's tone told him that this wasn't the kind of man you just ignored. So, with reluctant steps, he followed Lucas into the quiet space, settling into a chair across from him. Lucas folded his hands neatly on the table. "I'll get straight to the point. Isabel is not staying in Savannah forever. She has responsibilities, real responsibilities, that extend far beyond this town, beyond this hotel, and certainly beyond you." Daniel already knew that. He'd known it from the moment she walked into his life, But hearing it from Lucas, hearing it said so coldly, so clinically, made something in his chest tighten. "And what exactly do you think is happening here?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice steady. Lucas leaned back, studying him like a puzzle he was already solving. "I think you're a decent man, hard-working, loyal. I can see why Isabel is drawn to you." He tilted his head. "But let's be honest, shall we? This isn't a love story." Daniel's fingers curled into fists beneath the table. "You and Isabel," Lucas continued, tone smooth as glass, "it's temporary, a distraction. And when she leaves, and she will leave, you'll be right back where you started. The only difference is that you'll be left wondering why you ever thought someone like her would choose someone like you." Daniel exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. He'd been underestimated before, looked down on before. But this was different, because it wasn't just about him, it was about Isabel. "Funny," Daniel said, his voice calm despite the storm inside him. "You talk like you know her, but I don't think you do." Lucas's expression didn't change. "I know her better than you ever will." Daniel shook his head. "No, you know the version of her that was built for boardrooms and press conferences. But the woman I know, the one who laughs at bad jokes, who listens to my son's dinosaur facts like they actually matter, who stayed in my home and saw what life outside of wealth looks like." His voice hardened. "That's the real Isabel." Lucas's smirk faltered. Daniel stood. "If you're here to scare me off, you're wasting your time." Lucas exhaled through his nose, something shifting in his gaze. A flicker of respect, maybe, or amusement. Then he rose to his feet as well. "Fair enough," he said smoothly. "But just remember, people like Isabel don't get to choose their lives. And when she's gone, don't say I didn't warn you." With that, Lucas walked away, leaving Daniel standing alone in the lounge, anger thrumming beneath his skin. Isabel found him an hour later. She was fresh from a meeting, still dressed, in that polished corporate armor she wore so well. But the moment she saw him, she knew something was wrong. "You saw him," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I saw him," she exhaled, rubbing her temples. "I'm sorry, I didn't. Ask him to come here." "Doesn't matter," Daniel cut in. "What matters is that he's right, isn't he?" She frowned. "What?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're leaving. You can't stay here, Isabel. Not forever." She flinched. "Daniel, tell me I'm wrong," he challenged. Silence. And that was his answer. His chest tightened. He had known this was coming. He had always known, but knowing something didn't make it hurt less. Isabel stepped closer, her voice softer now. "I don't want to leave, but you will," Daniel said. "And when that happens, what am I supposed to do? What's Owen supposed to do?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, eyes flickering with emotion she couldn't quite name. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "Look, I don't regret knowing you, and I don't regret—" He stopped, shaking his head. "But I can't do this if I know it's just gonna end." She swallowed hard. "I don't want it to end." "Then what do you want, Isabel?" She didn't answer, because for all her intelligence, all her ability to control boardrooms and business deals, this was the one thing she hadn't figured out yet, and Daniel wasn't sure he could wait around while she did. That night, Daniel sat on the edge of Owen's bed, watching his son sleep. The little boy breathed evenly, his face soft and peaceful in the glow of the bedside lamp, so unaware of the storm brewing in the world of the adults around him. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. He needed to protect Owen, not from Isabel, but from the inevitable heartbreak of losing something they had both grown attached to, and maybe from his own heartbreak too, because Lucas was right about one thing. When Isabel left, she would take a part of Daniel with her, and he had no idea how to stop that from happening. The next morning, Isabel Sinclair was gone. Daniel Carter didn't know why he had expected anything different. Maybe it was wishful thinking, or maybe he had hoped that their late-night conversation had meant something more. That maybe, just maybe, she would have stayed, if only for a little longer. But when he arrived at work, she was nowhere to be seen. The hotel staff whispered about it. One moment, their billionaire CEO had been making changes, shaking up the way things were run, and the next, she had vanished, just like that. Daniel told himself it didn't matter, but deep down, it did. That evening, Daniel picked Owen up from school, as usual. The boy climbed into the car, stuffing his backpack into the back seat, before looking up expectantly. "Isabel coming over for dinner?" Daniel gripped the steering wheel. "No, buddy." Owen frowned. "Why not?" "She had to leave." The disappointment on Owen's face was immediate. A small, innocent kind of heartbreak that Daniel hated seeing. "But she said we'd have dinner again." Owen mumbled. Daniel exhaled. "I know." Owen was quiet for a long time before he finally asked, "Is she coming back?" Daniel hesitated. And that pause, that split second of uncertainty, was enough to give Owen his answer. The little boy slumped in his seat, staring out the window. "I'd liked her." Daniel swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. "Me too, kid." A week passed, then two, and Isabel Sinclair became a memory. Daniel threw himself into work, trying to ignore the gaping hole her absence left behind. The changes she had made at the hotel were still there. Higher wages for staff, better schedules, actual meal breaks. But the person responsible for them was gone. And just like Lucas had predicted, life went on. But not for Daniel. Because, no matter how much he tried to convince himself that this was for the best, he couldn't stop thinking about her, the way she had laughed at Owen's dinosaur stories, the way she had looked when she had admitted she didn't want to leave, the way she had wanted something more, just like him. And that was the part that scared him the most, because for the first time in years, Daniel had let himself want something more, too. It happened on a Thursday night. Daniel had just finished putting Owen to bed when there was a knock on his door. He wasn't expecting anyone, and when he pulled it open, the last person he thought he would see was standing there. Isabel. She looked different, not in a physical way. She was still the same woman with sharp blue eyes and the kind of presence that could command a room. But there was something else. Something raw, something unpolished, like she had been fighting a battle inside herself, and she had finally made a decision. Daniel didn't say anything. He just stared at her, and then she spoke. "I quit." He blinked. "What?" She swallowed. "Sinclair International, the company, the board meetings, the expectations. I quit." Daniel's chest tightened. "You... what?" She let out a slow, shaky breath. "I thought about what you said, about how I'd leave, about how I'd move on, and I realized I don't want to." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Isabel, I know it sounds crazy." She rushed on, stepping closer. "I know I have a life in New York, a career, but I..." She hesitated, eyes flickering with emotion. "I wasn't happy there, Daniel. I was existing, not living." She looked up at him, voice soft. "And then I met you and Owen, and for the first time I saw what it could be like to just be." Daniel's heart pounded against his ribs. She wasn't just saying this, she meant it. "You left everything," he murmured. She nodded. "Yeah." A long pause. Then quietly she asked, "Was it the wrong decision?" Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly all the fear, all the doubt, all the reasons why this shouldn't work, none of it mattered anymore, because she had chosen this, chosen him, chosen them. So instead of answering, Daniel took a step forward and kissed her, and in that moment nothing else mattered. Daniel Carter had spent so much of his life bracing for loss, ever since his wife walked out, since he had to raise Owen alone, since every job he took felt like it could disappear at any moment. He had learned to live with the idea that nothing good ever stayed. But now, Isabel was here, and for the first time in a long time, he let himself believe that something good could last. The next morning, Daniel woke up before sunrise. It wasn't unusual. Years of working long shifts had conditioned his body to expect exhaustion before the day even began. But today was different because Isabel was still here. She was in his kitchen, standing barefoot in one of his old sweatshirts, attempting to make coffee. And failing, Daniel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching as she muttered under her breath, pressing random buttons on his outdated coffee maker. "You're gonna break it," he said, voice still rough with sleep. Isabel startled, turning to face him, a sheepish smile appearing on her lips. "This thing is ancient. How does it even work?" Daniel chuckled, stepping forward to take over. "With patience." She watched as he poured 2 cups, shaking her head. "I've ordered espresso machines for 5-star resorts around the world, and yet I can't figure out a simple drip coffee maker." Daniel handed her a cup, smirking. "Guess you're officially a small-town girl now." She rolled her eyes but accepted the coffee, blowing gently on the surface before taking a careful sip. Then, with a sigh, she leaned against the counter, her gaze softening. "So," she murmured, "what now?" Daniel met her eyes, and for the first time he didn't feel afraid of the answer. "Now," he said, "we figure it out." When Owen woke up and saw Isabel in their kitchen, he reacted exactly as Daniel expected. "Isabel!" he shouted, sprinting across the room and throwing his arms around her waist. "You're back!" Isabel laughed, ruffling his hair. "I am," Owen pulled back, beaming up at her. "For how long?" Daniel and Isabel exchanged a look, and then Isabel crouched down to meet Owen's gaze. "For as long as you'll have me," she said gently. Owen gasped, his excitement practically vibrating through him. "You mean it?" She nodded, and, just like that, Owen launched into a million questions. Was she going to live in Savannah? Would she still visit fancy hotels? Could she help him build the biggest dinosaur fort in the backyard? Daniel watched them with a quiet smile, something warm spreading in his chest. This was right. This was home. A week later, Isabel officially resigned from Sinclair International. The news made headlines. Billionaire heiress walks away from empire. What's next for Isabel Sinclair? Sinclair princess chooses small-town life over corporate throne, but Isabel didn't care. For the first time in years, she wasn't living for shareholders or expectations or the weight of a last name that never felt like hers. She was living for herself, for this town, this hotel, this man and the little boy who had unknowingly become a part of her heart. And Daniel? He let her in. Fully. No more walls, no more doubts. She had chosen them, and Daniel was finally ready to choose her back. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel and Isabel sat on the porch, Owen playing in the yard with a toy dinosaur. The air was warm, tinged with the scent of the ocean. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked softly. Isabel turned to him, smiling, "Happier than I've ever been." Daniel reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You know this isn't the life you were raised for," he murmured. She squeezed his hand. "No, but it's the life I chose." Daniel studied her, then leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead, a life built on kindness, love, second chances. And this time he knew she wasn't going anywhere, because for the first time in both of their lives, they were finally home. And that, my friends, is the story of Daniel and Isabel, a tale of love, kindness, and the unexpected turns that life can take. But now we want to hear from you. Tell us, where are you watching from? Are you tuning in from a cozy apartment in the city? A quiet small town like Savannah, or maybe somewhere completely unexpected? Drop your location in the comments. We'd love to see how far this story has traveled. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another heartwarming, emotional, and inspiring story. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that move the heart and soul. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being a part of this wonderful storytelling community. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and we'll see you in the next story.